What's up, Buckeye fans? Welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We're coming to you live on a Saturday, which is a little bit different than we've normally done it. We've usually gone late in the week, but had some other things come up, and I think probably good that it did because it allows us to talk about a topic that got a little buzz this weekend, or this week, I should say. We'll get into that in just a second. Going to have a red stripe here on this Saturday afternoon. Part of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. Not quite the same cracking sound as the can. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the thumbs up button. Turn on those alerts. If you're listening to the podcast version or on Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it, please like, subscribe, follow, all that stuff. It helps us tremendously. But let's get into it. I wanted to talk today about something that made some rounds this week, and that is the debate over Ohio State beating Michigan versus Ohio State winning a national championship. We'll go more into that in just a second. But to do it, we're bringing in Steve Hellwagon. Steve, how's it going, man? You've covered a few Michigan games, right?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, almost every one of them since 1990 probably. Missed one or two here or there. But, yeah, probably 35, 36, something like that. I have to count them up someday. But, yeah, it's interesting discussion. I know it came up, people talking to some of the guys from Ohio State that got drafted about, what happened against Michigan and, balancing that against winning a national championship and what means more and what's better and all those different things. I've kind of got my answer, but, I'm open to suggestion on it. Certainly, you're measured by how you do against the University of Michigan as an Ohio State football player or as a team. But in this modern era of college football, there's much more to the season than just that one game. And we're finding that out as we go now.
Yeah, absolutely. As we talk about this, if you're watching live, feel free to throw your thoughts, comments, questions in the chat. We'll have time after this discussion to address those and whatnot. But if you didn't see it this week, Jack Sawyer and Will Howard were on Ben Roethlisberger's podcast, which is called Footballin', I believe. And they were asked, obviously those two guys just got drafted by the Steelers. They were asked about the Michigan rivalry and losing to Michigan, but winning a national championship. And essentially what's more important if you're a Buckeye. And Jack Sawyer's response was winning a national championship. That takes no emphasis off how important the game is. If anyone tells you they'd rather go 1-12 and just beat the team up north, you're crazy. You're playing this game to win championships, and make no mistake about it, no one wants to beat those guys more than we do. But at the end of the day, there's nothing we could have done after that. We have our shot to go chase the ultimate goal, which is to win a national championship. He then said, it's like the NFL. You lose 4 games in a regular season, you're probably the number 1 overall seed in the playoffs. So that's kind of the approach we took, especially with the expanded playoffs. And I think it's going to continue to be like that. Obviously, the game is still going to be the game because it is the game, the best rivalry in sport. But I think at the end of the day, I think you'd be crazy to say you would rather beat them and not win a national championship instead of winning a national championship and not beat them. In a perfect world, you do both of those things, but obviously we didn't. But winning a national championship kind of erases that for me. For me, at least it does. Steve, as you sort of mentioned there was a time when, we're talking pre-BCS.
Prehistoric days.
Yeah, when beating Michigan was everything, right? I mean, if you got the national championship at the end of the season, great, but that was all the polls. You weren't, you beat Michigan, you play in the Rose Bowl most likely, and that's your season. See what happens. So as someone who grew up with this, who covered it, just what is your initial reaction to kind of hearing Jack Sawyer's comments, which I think there are a lot of people that agree with that out there.
Yeah, I would agree with it as well. I think that we have to understand the bigger picture, I suppose, of what college football is all about in the year 2025. And winning the national championship is the ultimate goal, I think, for any team. Ohio State sets out 3 goals, it sounds like, before every season, which is beat Michigan, win the Big Ten championship, and win the national championship. And over the last several years, they hadn't done any of that. And they finally broke through in 2025 and won the national championship. And, it's been a while since Ohio State has won a Big Ten title and beaten Michigan. So you go back several years, obviously, I think all the way back to 2019 for the win over Michigan, because they didn't play in 2020, and they've lost 4 in a row here. So that does not bode real well, obviously, when you think about it. But Ohio State's going to get that turned around. I don't have any doubt about that. Could be this year, maybe next year. I don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but I would assume it could be this year. I think Ohio State's in the line to have another outstanding team coming up this season. So I'm not going to worry so much about that. I always made the comment that there'll be a year that Ohio State wins a national championship without beating Michigan. And lo and behold, it happened in the first year of the 12-team tournament. You think about it, 12 teams make the tournament or the playoff. There's going to be teams with losses that are in this playoff. And certainly in 2017, Alabama lost its rivalry game to Auburn and went on to come back and win the national championship when the 14 playoff was done that season. So it could be done. You can lose to your rival in this new era of college football. Not that anybody wants to. You can lose to your rival and still come back and win the national championship. And I think obviously that's what Ohio State did. To me, that's the bigger honor, the bigger thing that you set out at the beginning of the year to do above all else, in my opinion, is to win the national championship.
As you were watching the confetti fall after they win the national championship, and you're sort of seeing those players celebrate, is Michigan even in your mind, their mind, anyone's minds, you think, at that point in time?
No, I don't think so. I think by that point, that was in the rearview mirror. I think the win at home over Tennessee kind of exercised a lot of those demons. And certainly after the way they obliterated Oregon in the Rose Bowl, you kind of stop thinking about what had happened previously, and we're focused straight ahead on what could be next. And obviously having to go down to Texas and beat Texas was a big task for Ohio State. They pulled it off, and then they beat the only team that was left standing, Notre Dame, to win the national championship. So there'll be a year coming up, just as we saw this year, where they had to play Oregon twice. Potentially and more likely it's to happen to play a Big Ten team or Michigan as a rematch in the Big Ten championship game, and less likely to happen in the playoff, although it did happen this year. So to me, it's just a matter of timing and the way things work out in the realm of college football. And Ohio State, and Michigan has been, arguably the best rivalry in all of sports for all these decades and all these years. And each team has kind of taken their turn dominating it. Ohio State had dominated it here in the 2000s. And now Michigan here in the 2020s has kind of, been able to flex its muscles a little bit. So, I guess we'll have to wait and see if the tables have truly turned on this rivalry to where we could say that Michigan is an equal again to Ohio State. But to my way of thinking, I don't worry too much about it. I look at it that, again, the biggest prize in the sport is the national championship. Ohio State's only done that on 9 occasions, and 7 of them that I would call consensus championships, taking out the ones in 1961 and 1970, when there were other teams that were more widely regarded as winning those national championships. I look at it that Ohio State, again, just to get in that picture, it's been a full decade since Ohio State had last won the championship, and it had been 12 years prior to that since the previous one. They come so few and far between. I think you have to celebrate those times that Ohio State's able to win the national championship. And regardless of what happens in that rivalry game against Michigan, you got to have to go on and play the rest of the season. There is more season after that game, which is kind of strange to say. That game can help set you up for success in the playoff, although, as we saw this year, it's not even necessary. So, kind of two different things. I won't say it's antiquated thinking. I won't say it's 1970s thinking, but, here in the 2020s, it is a little bit different time.
Yeah, apologize there. My camera was cutting out. but I was listening. So I think if you were to think back, you mentioned antiquated, like when you started covering this team regularly, if someone were to tell you in however many years, Ohio State's going to win a national championship without beating Michigan, what do you think your reaction would have been at that point?
Skepticism, particularly in the two-team BCS up until 2013. There didn't seem to be any way that was even a remote possibility. But obviously, we saw in recent years, Ohio State did lose a game to Michigan and still made the 14 playoff. So that was an interesting development. Certainly, the year that they lost to Georgia in the semifinals, obviously in 2022. So you think about it. Again, this is just a different time and a different era where more teams are rewarded with a path to the national championship than just the conference champions or just the winners of those rivalry games. And so, you look at it that you have to kind of prepare for the long haul in this era of college football, and success in that one game is awesome. It'll be great, obviously, if you get it, but if not, you move on and you try to win the next game.
Yeah, I think back to 2007 after that 1-2 game when people were talking about a potential rematch in the national championship. Like that's probably as close as it ever came to one of those teams losing that game and having a shot at the national championship. And obviously that didn't play out the way that we're talking about now. Do you think that if the shoe were on the other foot, if Ohio State wins last year, wins the national championship, beats Michigan, wins the national championship, and then this year it's Michigan that wins after losing to Ohio State, do you think that changes Ohio State's perspective, Ohio State people's perspective at all, if they are the team that did just do it by beating their rival versus the team that did not in Ohio State's perspective? I think you're muted, Steve.
Sorry. Yeah, my dog was barking, so I had to let the dog out. But I think you have to look at it that every year is kind of its own animal, its own entity, and kind of take the circumstances as they come. And, my biggest thing is let's make sure we get the best 12 teams into this playoff that have the chance to go on and play for the national championship. And I think that's the most important thing. And if the committee is able to do that every year, then I think any of the 12 teams have a viable chance to win this thing. I mean, it's going to be very difficult for teams 9 through 12 to go on the road and win a first round game in December. As we saw, those were kind of hard for the visiting teams to get to win those games. But you get through that. I mean, it's anybody's game, and we saw two teams that did not have buys that got to the championship round, and that's just the way that it all worked out. So, in fact, Texas didn't win the SEC either, did they? So, all four teams that got to the semifinals did not have buys. So, all those champions that had buys got swept aside. So, anything can happen. That just typifies that anything can happen in the playoff. And again, I don't want to put anything down on the Michigan rivalry. I think that it is still the best rivalry in all of sports. And I think it's just got to be taken in the proper perspective, which is it's one piece of an overall larger puzzle in this era of college football. It's not the end-all be-all that it once was.
Do you think, just because you said end all be all there, do you think that dilutes the game a little bit?
I think you could make that argument that just because a Rose Bowl is not necessarily hinging on that game anymore, certainly a spot in the Big Ten championship game feels like it'll be decided with that game one way or the other, either for either team or for both teams in a lot of the seasons going forward, just because those two schools above most of the others in the Big Ten have a commitment to excellence in football. It's their thing. Indiana's great at basketball typically, or has been over history. Maryland's great at lacrosse. Different sports for different. Right now, USC and UCLA are cornering the market on women's basketball. So, to me, Ohio State and Michigan, that game is still going to mean a ton. In a normal year, it's going to mean that one or both of those teams have a chance to advance and go on to the Big Ten championship and/or cement their spot in the playoffs. So, again, you could say it diminishes a little bit just because it doesn't completely decide the postseason fate for either team. But for bragging rights, Michigan fans have been chirping quite a bit. Even
Right.
since Ohio State's won the national championship. Excuse me, that that Michigan, handed Ohio State one of its 2 losses, and the only loss that they weren't able to avenge this past season. So Michigan has retained bragging rights despite Ohio State winning the national championship.
Yeah. Weird thing to say. Thank you, Steve. I know you got stuff going on later today, so I appreciate you taking some time, giving some perspective on all of this.
No problem. And I hope everybody enjoys a great Mother's Day weekend. And thank you to all the mothers out there for everything you've done for us, me, myself, and everybody else. Mom, thanks a lot. And I hope everybody has a great weekend.
All right. Thanks, Steve. All right. Appreciate Steve jumping on here. We kind of did this a little last minute, given some scheduling stuff. But cheers to the moms out there. Happy almost Mother's Day, depending on when you're listening to this. So I'm going to continue. We got a lot of Steve's thoughts. I wanted to let him kind of give his perspective on it. Again, if you're watching this live, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, any of those places, feel free to jump in the comment section. Give your thoughts on this. I'm curious what people think. And I do think, well, we'll get to that in a second. But we've got Jordan Klosterman here says, I think win and Natties are pretty much worth the same. I'm not willing to give a whole decade of losing to UM to win Natties, or beating UM every year and not winning Natty in the next 10 years. I want a mix of both. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to take you guys sort of behind the curtain for me. I don't often talk about before I was covering Ohio State on this, but I did grow up mostly in Columbus after I moved to Ohio, and I cheered for Ohio State. I went to Ohio State, and I think it was the 2011 Ohio State-Michigan game, if I have that right, up in Michigan, up in Ann Arbor, was the first time I went on the road to an Ohio State-Michigan game. Buddy of mine, actually, I think I went to that one by myself, and then had some buddies that went with me on subsequent trips before I started covering the team. It was 2011 in Ann Arbor, the 40-34 Michigan win. Since then, whether it was me as a fan or me as a media member, I've been at every Ohio State-Michigan game, and been to a lot of other games. I can't say I've been to a ton of other college football rivalry games, but I've been to plenty of rivalry games in other sports. I've obviously watched a lot of them, college sports and others. And look, there's nothing that compares in my mind to the Michigan game. And I think that, as Steve said towards the end there, like, that is going to remain important, and it has to remain important because that's part of the fabric of college football and I think college sports, frankly. These rivalries are different than professional sports, or at least they have been. And I think it needs to remain that way. Now it is changing. And some of that is what Steve talked about with the college football playoff. And like we saw last year with Ohio State and kind of where this whole topic came from, you can lose that game or any rivalry game and go on and, potentially if things had gone differently, if Ohio State had won at Oregon, they would probably lose that game, still play in the Big Ten championship game, and then maybe go on to win a national championship. So like the after effects of that game in terms of the rest of your season don't matter as much. And so I do think that changes the equation in terms of like what that game means probably more outside of the fan base and probably to younger fans. And not that I am an older fan or older media member by any stretch of the imagination. But I think we will continue to see more people maybe not have that same level of pain coming out of that game because it didn't just ruin your season. I remember one time in college when Ohio State was number 1 going up to Wisconsin, where I had some friends and watching, I'm sure you guys remember, the Wisconsin returns the opening kickoff. They beat the Buckeyes. I remember driving home with my friends from Ohio State, and we're talking about how, like, well, what is, this game? I don't remember exactly the date, but it was middle of the season. Like, the season was kind of more or less over for Ohio State, unless, like 2008 when several things happened that got Ohio State back in it. And like, for some part of the sport, I think that was fun. Like, the games meant so much. Every game, if you slipped up one time to the wrong opponent, you were out of it. And even if you slipped up to the right opponent, you might have been out of it. And there was just something about like the weight of every game. Now, as I've seen the 14 playoff and last year with the 12-team playoff, like, I do think that this new format, this new era of college football, there is some different interesting things. You got teams like a Boise State last year that probably wouldn't have been in the mix. Ohio State, frankly, after that loss to Michigan, but they were in the mix pretty much the whole season. So, like, it does make things more interesting for some teams at the end of the season. Other teams maybe are playing for seeding, but I do think that there are pros and cons to both of it. Going back to the Michigan game, I think the other thing when we're talking about the proliferation, so to speak, of college sports, specifically college football, is the transfer portal. And one of the things that used to make college rivalries great is, like, a lot of these teams, especially in football, but in other sports too, I guess basketball is the one with the one and dones where you don't really get to know the players. Like, these players, whether they grew up in Ohio and Michigan, grew up fans of either team or not, they spent 3-4 years in the program experiencing that rivalry, right? At the end of every regular season, they experienced it. They either felt the jubilation of winning or they felt the sorrow, the pain, whatever you want to call it, of losing. Cheers to winning. But when you come out the other end, or when you come out on this end, with the transfer portal and things like that, now guys are coming in. Will Howard was quoted or was on that same podcast, and he admitted, me being new to the rivalry, obviously I was a Penn State fan. I think the rational Buckeye fan would say, give me the championship every day of the week. I would hope so, so on and so forth. Will Howard, as much as he cared, and credit to Will Howard for investing himself in Ohio State last year and becoming a Buckeye, he only experienced it once. He only went through 1 year of hearing about the rivalry every day and all that. And so I think that changes it too. And, same with, Seth McLaughlin, Quinshon Judkins, any of these guys that were basically here for a year. It's just different, right? And I think that as college sports, specifically football, becomes more professional, it changes everything about it. And so the rivalry doesn't dictate necessarily how your season ends, but it also, you get guys that aren't really as invested, not to say that Will Howard wasn't invested, but they hadn't spent as much time focusing on Michigan because he was playing at Kansas State, just to use the Will Howard example. So it is very different. I also wonder, and I heard this brought up by a friend of mine, 10 TV's Adam King on, I think he was on 97.1 The Fan the other day talking about this. And like, how different is this in Jack Sawyer's mind if he hadn't gone 0-4? And not to say that Jack is downplaying rivalry because he lost 4 times. But I do think that maybe that obviously elevates your successes, right? So if you're Jack Sawyer, of course, the national championship that you won at the end is going to feel the best. If he had gone 3-1 against Michigan, losing that final game, but still winning a national championship, maybe his tone is a little bit different. I don't know. We'll never know that. But I do think the fact that Ohio State has lost 4 in a row sort of changes the conversation. And I think that, if you look at the guys at the end of that Michigan game, you lose 13-10. The emotion, whether you were at the stadium or not, you saw the fights sort of break out on the field when Michigan tried to plant the flag. Like, clearly in that moment, that meant everything to the Buckeyes. And that's what Jack Sawyer said going in. Literally, the quote was, "It would mean everything," when asked about finally getting a chance to beating Michigan. They obviously didn't do that, but you saw the emotion come out. And it's a different emotion than in a championship game, obviously, but it still mattered, especially to a guy like Jack Sawyer from Columbus. Grew up with the rivalry, spent 4 years. I mean, he wasn't the only one. Davis Igbinosun was in. A bunch of guys were. I remember standing there filming Carmen when somebody, yelled they were planting a flag, and guys just turn around and rant. Like, clearly there was something emotional there in that moment. So I do wonder about that, and just, it's easier to say that, okay, the national championship means more if you'd won the national championship. What if Ohio State won 2 national championships during this tenure, but the Michigan game, lost all 4 Michigan games? Like, I think you can make arguments different ways depending on how your career plays out. Keith Jeffrey says 3 games versus Michigan don't even count, is irrelevant. Give me playoff wins versus the SEC and the Natty. Yeah, that's another part of this specific equation when we're talking about these last 4 years is everything that's gone on with Michigan, and obviously the sign stealing scandal. I haven't touched a lot about that on this show just because we're not a Michigan show, and I don't think it's necessary to touch on a ton, but obviously that's a part of it, right? It helped turn Michigan around. It helped flip this rivalry, at least to some degree. And I think, Ohio State fans, Ohio State players, probably, if you were able to honestly speak with them, maybe those losses now don't feel as bad. And so it's easier to say that. Friend of mine, I think he's a friend, Kevin Noon, told me to shotgun a beer, you coward. Well, I'm drinking Red Stripe, Kevin, so it's hard to shotgun. I'm not sure I need to chug it right now, but Kevin's seen me shotgun a beer, so I think we'll save that one for off camera. The other thing I wanted to bring up with this topic, and thank you guys for the comments, even Kevin's. If you have any more comments, if you have other questions outside of this topic, we're not going to go nearly as long as we normally do. So if you do have anything you want to post in the comments, we'll try and get to those at the end if there are more. The other thing I'm interested in is players on teams that, especially like the 90s, players on teams that struggled against Michigan but didn't win a national championship. How does this sit with them? Because obviously, as fans, you're going to have your opinion, right? And I think there's probably an age line where people would say that the Michigan game matters more to them. Not everybody, but I think you'd probably see more people of a certain age say that matters because that's how they grew up, right? That was the most important thing, was beating Michigan every year. But the players that went through it, like the players that went through in the 90s, the John Cooper era, what would be their perspective on this? And they were players that more often than not came up short against Michigan and then didn't win a national championship. So like they have a unique perspective, because if you go forward into the Tressel era and the Urban Meyer era, obviously the start of the Ryan Day era, like these players had success against Michigan. Some of those teams won national championships, but the teams that didn't do either of those things well, what do they think about this? Because I would imagine if you were to talk to some of the guys that played on the teams in the 90s during the Cooper era, that they would put beating Michigan, having the opportunity to beat Michigan or beat Michigan more than they did. I think they would put that higher than maybe some of the guys that just finished playing or are playing currently or will play. And that again goes back to Steve's point about just kind of the change of the times, right? That that with the 12-team playoff, the transfer portal, all of this, the perspective on the rivalry has shifted, which, again, going back to my point earlier, or my story earlier about kind of my passion for the Michigan game, I don't like that as much. I want it to still be, doesn't have to be as important. I understand winning the national championship is the biggest deal. But I know people, younger people my age, my fiance, for instance, was so frustrated after losing to Ohio State, losing to Michigan, that like the first game against Tennessee, she watched it, but I remember getting text messages during it like, where the hell was this against Michigan? And she couldn't let it go. And like, I get it. I understand. And I also understand the side of, once you win the national championship, that changes. But I do think that like that pain was real. I saw it here in doing these podcasts, on social media, on our message board. It's not like at the time people were like, this wasn't okay. Well, not a big deal. They lost to Michigan, but they're still the best team in the country and they're going to go win the playoff. No, not a lot of people were saying that. Very few people were saying that, I think. Because I think it's hard with that emotion to then set that aside and look at the possibility of the playoff, especially in the first year of the playoff, and not really knowing how that's going to go. Maybe that changes in the future now that it's happened. But like, I know a lot of people were very upset, very pissed about losing to Michigan. And some of that had to do with the fact that, okay, this team just lost to a bad Michigan team. There's no way they're going to go 4 straight against good teams, right? Some of it had to do with that, but also just you lost to Michigan like for a 4th straight time. And, now you're going to go try and win a national championship like that. Those two things, as Steve was talking about earlier, they didn't make sense to a lot of people, I think, because it wasn't something that had happened. Steve mentioned Alabama and Auburn, and I think it was 2017. 2 years ago, I think it was 2 or 3, the Kansas City Chiefs lose. I think it was the 3rd to last week of the regular season, sometimes toward the end of the regular season. They lose to the Las Vegas Raiders, and that is a pretty big rivalry. As big as, maybe not the biggest in the NFL, certainly not, but one of the bigger rivalries in the NFL, certainly that division. And they go on and win the Super Bowl. And like, no one cares that you lost to the Raiders. You were upset that Sunday or whatever. But it was still, the Chiefs were still really good. They were winning the division. Everyone believed that they could win a Super Bowl. And like, that is where we're going with this sport. And I'm okay with that to some degree, in the fact that like you can move on from a loss to a rival and recognize that there is more to come, and maybe don't have the panic that people had after that game, or the backlash, the Ryan Day stuff, and the just a lot of negativity. But I also think that you are losing something in college football if that game just becomes, if you walk out of Ohio Stadium in 2 years, if Ohio State, God forbid, loses to Michigan again, if you walk out of that stadium like, oh, that sucked, but, we'll get them next year and we've got the playoff coming up. Like, I don't know. That doesn't feel right to me. The loser of that game, the whole point of what makes it so great, and this is another thing that's different than the NFL, is you obviously only play that team once in the regular season, as opposed to twice, like a divisional opponent in the regular season in the NFL. But I don't like the idea that the loser of that game, that fan base, is going to walk off the field, even the players, coaches, whatever, walk off the field like, it doesn't matter that much, because that game should matter. That game should be not life or death anymore. It's not. You can't change that. We're not putting the genie back in the bottle. But I think that it should still suck if you lose that game, because then on the flip side, when you win that game, say Ohio State goes to Ann Arbor next year and finally gets back to winning ways in this series, ends the 4-game losing streak, then you should feel that good about it. And it shouldn't just be, all right, on to the Big Ten championship game or on to the play. No, like you should enjoy the opportunity to beat Michigan. And I think there was some of that when Ohio State was on, the run it went on with Tressel and Meyer, with all those wins. Like I do think there was some element of expecting it to happen every year. And so I think that's why, obviously 2011. Yeah. The year I was there, they lose to Michigan, but like, I think that's why 2021 hurt so bad for a lot of Buckeye fans is like a lot of people, whether you were a longtime fan or, a younger person who maybe hadn't really experienced losses to Michigan, like you kind of grown to expect, like, this is Ohio State's rivalry now, right? And so, like, I think, for the rivalry, it was probably good for Michigan to at least win 1 or 2 there. Now, 4 in a row is a lot, especially last year's. But I think that you have to still have that part of this sport, or else, like, what is it? What is changing it from another? Does it just become a minor league for the NFL? And I know that's the direction we're heading. And like, look, there's good things in it. Like I said, the playoff, I believe, players being able to get paid, like all of that. I don't love the transfer portal in its current form, but I think there is probably some positives to players getting the opportunity to move around in some fashion. I think some things need to change there. But I don't want to see a version of college football, any college sport, where the rivalries aren't as big of a deal anymore, or at least not still a huge deal. I want it to be great when Ohio State beats Michigan, or you think it sucks when Ohio State loses to Michigan. You pick I use the Chiefs Raiders rivalry, but pick any rivalry in professional sports. Like, rarely is it a make or break type thing. And that's what it's becoming in college football. It's not, it's almost like college basketball where, think Duke, North Carolina, like they play twice a year in the regular season. It sucks losing, but your season does go on. But I still think it needs to suck. And that's the biggest thing. It needs to be painful when you lose, because that makes it feel so much better when you do win. So I guess where I come down in the discussion here of, Jack Sawyer is like, well, and there's one more thing that I meant to bring up real quick. Ohio State came into the last season with 3 goals. We've kind of forgotten about that. The 3 goals were to beat Michigan, win the Big Ten, win a national championship. They accomplished 1. So I think for Jack Sawyer then, and anyone to say like, that's the ultimate goal. Well, yes, but you had 3 stated goals and you only accomplished 1 of those. Now, is it the biggest one of all of them? Yeah, I guess you could probably make that argument, because you do go out there and play now to have a chance to play in the Big Ten championship, obviously, but to get into the playoff and try and win a national championship. That's the ultimate goal at the end of the year. It's no longer that the season ends at the end of the Big Ten season and maybe you get to play in a bowl game. I think that the hold on, there was a post on our message board that I wanted to read, because I think it articulately paints the picture that I'm trying to make. It was from Sprintin' Sports, and it said, the reason why this came to be is because losing to Michigan always, in all caps, meant losing the national title. Furthermore, it meant you probably stayed home for the holidays and didn't go to a bowl game. Those who are not of a certain age may not even know the Big Ten sent only 1 team each year to a bowl game, period. The rest of the conference stayed home. Players were there to get an education and not merely play football, and the Big Ten meant it. This wasn't Oklahoma and Texas or Alabama and Tennessee, where the loser had time in the season to recover and still went on to a bowl game or even a national title. It was winner take all, the loser sitting at home to stew for a full year. So I don't think we have that anymore. We definitely don't have that anymore. But like, that is why the rivalry was so important. And there needs to be a way to evolve into this new era, I think, while still preserving something as important as the game. You have to keep some things as much as things change. And I'm not opposed to change, but I do think that, this rivalry, as it shifts and pivots, I guess, in terms of what it means, there still needs to be the importance on it. And, I still think that come next late November, when Ohio State goes up to Michigan, even if Ohio State's undefeated and already locked into the Big Ten championship game and, going to the college football playoff, I think that game still, there still needs to be that nervous energy all week. I remember in high school and college, like the week leading up to that game, I got nothing done. And I think everyone understood it, growing up just outside of Columbus and then going to Ohio State, like everybody knew what was coming that weekend. And I had professors that really lightened up. You are kind of getting towards the end of, we were on quarters when I was there. But like, that's how important it was to everybody there. And I say everybody, not everybody is a huge football fan, but like everyone knew what was coming. And there was, like I said, nervous energy, even during that period of dominance for Ohio State. Like it was, okay, like they got to get it done. Like you're talking to people are wearing more scarlet and gray stuff. And that to me is what needs to continue, because it does need to matter, in my opinion. Now, do I want to, as a Buckeye fan, do you want to see Ohio State go win a national championship? Absolutely. If you can go on an Alabama type dynastic run here, that's great. But there needs to be Michigan wins in there, I think. Just my opinion. I haven't seen any more comments or questions. If you do have any here in the next minute or so, feel free to throw those in there. I want to reiterate Steve's point. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. We did our Mother's Day on Friday, so I've already celebrated with my mother and my older sister, who is a mother now to a wonderful niece of mine. So thank you to all the mothers out there for what you do. Happy Mother's Day to you. Cheers. And yeah, we'll be back next week. I had a plan for what this show was going to be. I was hoping to do it Friday. I have a story coming out. I won't give too much away on it. A story coming out that I want to come back and talk about. So that will be the plan next week. It's kind of a rankings of things, you'll see. Hoping to have that done for Monday now and come back later in the week and sort of talk through it a little bit more. Get your thoughts, get your opinions on it. So we'll be back later next week. Probably go back to our normal Friday afternoon slot, recording live. And then we'll put the podcast out. So again, like, subscribe, all of that. If you're on Facebook, turn on the alerts, or excuse me, if you're on YouTube, turn on the alerts. All those other ones, subscribe, podcast, download, 5-star review. All of that helps us out a lot. And it allows you to get more of our content, which is really the goal here. So thank you guys for tuning in for another Bucknuts Happy Hour. I hope, not that we settled the debate, but I think Steve and I both gave our opinion on what we think with this Ohio State-Michigan debate in the 2020s. So cheers. We'll talk to you next week.